This summer, we're inviting you for a very special double feature book study, diving into Small Groups, Big Results by Dr. Julia Lindsay and Rock Your Literacy Block by Lindsay Kemeny. Over 8 weeks, we'll dive into practical research-aligned strategies to help you build a more intentional literacy block, strengthen your small groups, maximize instructional time, and head into back-to-school season with a little more pep in your step. You'll get live weekly discussions, recordings, planning supports, and a community of passionate educators learning alongside of you. If you're ready for practical implementation and not just theory, come join us this summer. It's the summer of the Lindsays. Head to the link in the show notes to save your spot. You're listening to episode 96 of Literacy in Color. Today's episode is such a special one because if you love literacy podcasts, I'm joined by two voices you're likely very familiar with, Melissa Loftus and Lori Sappington from the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast. In today's conversation, we're diving into the powerful connection between fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Why comprehension is so complex to teach, how automaticity frees up cognitive space for meaning making, and what teachers can actually do tomorrow to support stronger readers. This episode is packed with practical routines, research-backed insights, and so many moments that will leave you thinking deeply about what it truly means to understand text. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. And today, the tables are turning in the best way possible because I'm joined by two voices that so many of us already know, love, and trust. We have Melissa Loftus and Lori Sappington, hosts of the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast. And these teachers turned authors and podcasters have built one of the most respected platforms in the science of reading community, bridging research with practical application. And what I love about their show, it's always with kindness and practicality and this message that we're all always learning on this journey together. So with their experience, they've interviewed over 250 guest experts and have over 3 million downloads worldwide. And along that journey comes a lot of knowledge acquisition, and they have in turn become experts as well. So today I'm excited to be interviewing them for a change, and we're going to be tapping into something that they have true expertise on, and that's how fluency and vocabulary come together to truly fuel comprehension. So before we dive into weaving this rope together, I just want to welcome you both to the show, and I'm so excited to have you here on my show.
Thank you for having us. We love being guests.
I know that was such a kind and thoughtful introduction. Thank you.
All the accolades. You guys have put in the work.
It's wild. Actually, so we're recording the end of April and we're completing our 7th year as our podcast went live, like today, around today, actually. So,
oh my gosh. Happy almost podcast birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's incredible. I've been there since the beginning too.
Oh my
gosh. Thank you.
It's been fun watching your guys' journey.
And now you have an awesome podcast. So
I appreciate you. I'm a little nervous, to be honest. Like I've interviewed these researchers and now got these podcast hosts. Know a thing or two. So before we dive in, maybe you can take a moment just to briefly share your background in education and how you found yourself in the boat that you're currently in.
So I started as a high school English teacher, and then Lori and I had very similar paths here where we both saw We had students who were just struggling to read. And high school it's tough to really be able to do anything once they're in high school to really make that difference because they're just trying to get their credits and get out of there. So we both kind of were like, okay, let's take a step back. Lori went way back farther than I did, but I went back to middle school. And that's where I spent most of my teaching career. So I taught for over 10 years in sixth grade. That was my sweet spot, was sixth grade, and went back to become a reading specialist. And I never was a reading specialist. I stayed in the classroom, but I wanted to learn, like, how can I help my students actually learn to read? It was still hard in middle school because you don't have a lot of time, but I did my best and I was trying to learn. And then I'll let Lori jump in so then we can.
You want to merge back together? Okay. So I started in high school too, Michelle. And then I went, like Melissa said, went back to teach second grade, ended up teaching the primary grades, and then went up to upper elementary and taught for about 12 years in those different grades, kind of going back and forth, wondering what is going on, because I saw some issues in second grade. I was like, well, okay, if we're not getting the reading clarified here, then, and I'm doing some things that are seemingly okay and some things that I'm just not really sure about what's going on in other grades. And I kind of hopped around trying to figure it out, hopped around to different schools trying to figure it out, went back, got my master's just like Melissa. And then we both ended up in Baltimore City as district level coaches, where we continued to try to keep learning to figure out what was going on. And at that point, Baltimore City had been writing their own curriculum. So we were part of teams that wrote curriculum. We were part of teams that went out into the schools, that supported teachers, that taught lessons, coached teachers. And during all that, we still were like, I don't know, this still feels really chaotic. There's a lot going on. We don't have a consistent curriculum. In fact, I was a coach in K-8 and K-12 schools, and sometimes there was a different curriculum for K-2, 3-5, 6-8, and 9-12. Insane.
Yeah, so eventually Lori and I came together when Baltimore City started actually adopting some really good curriculum. And Lori and I were like, oh my gosh, first of all, like, this exists. That's great, right? That we don't have to create something from scratch and we had teachers writing after school. Like, I mean, it was exhausting, but there's really good stuff out there. But then what came with it for me and Lori was the learning behind it, because that's what we also had to bring to the teachers in Baltimore was like, well, why are we doing it this way? Why are we making these changes, both for foundational skills and for comprehension, reading comprehension? Like, why are we doing it so different than we used to do it? And so that's where our learning kind of came together with me and Lori. And a lot of things that we both were like, we didn't learn this in the many years and a lot of money we spent on college. We didn't learn these things, but we were learning them together. And then that's when Lori had the idea to share some of this learning.
Melissa into
she
it.
forced
No,
me into it.
I always say that. I'm like, but it was only half true. She did willingly do it.
I did. But it was definitely, she was like, let's just do this because other people are learning too and didn't learn it in college, and we should share this learning. So that's how we started our podcast and how we got to where we are today.
Yeah. And you're right, Michelle. We do read and learn a ton every single day. I mean, as you know, the amount that you have to do to prepare to interview someone is so much. Plus the fact that you want to be up on these topics and learn. And I mean, I think curiosity drives curiosity, right? So,
and new research keeps coming. So there's always more to learn.
There's always more to learn. It's so true. I love your journeys. I love that you had this yearning to always learn more and seek the answers to figure out this puzzle. And it's hard work, even for people who are following the science of reading research. It's still hard work. There's not clear-cut black and white answers to a lot of things. And not the same thing is going to work for every batch of kids either. So it's science and it's an art, and having people invested in learning and synthesizing and coaching and having podcasts like yours is such a treasure. So today we're going to be talking about the beast, comprehension, right? Everyone's like, how do you teach comprehension? That's the $1 million question. And so before we even dive into there, why do you think comprehension is just so hard to teach in the first place?
Okay, so I think there's a really easy answer to this, is that first of all, it's just very complicated, right? Like, it's hard to teach because it's complicated. But diving into some factors as to why, I want to talk about this idea when Melissa and Kristen Conradi-Smith on our podcast shared this idea with us. And we were like, yes, this puts a name to something we've been talking about but didn't have words for. The idea is constrained. and unconstrained skills, right? So some reading skills are constrained. They're finite, they're easy to master. And then others are unconstrained. They grow over time. There's just this never-ending reach to them. You can always learn more. And comprehension is in that unconstrained category. We like to do a comparison to sports here. I think it's really helpful if you're playing basketball. Constrained skills are something like passing the ball, right? Knowing offense and defense. Knowing how to take a foul shot from the foul line, right? Those are constrained skills. You can see if a child has mastered that or if a person has mastered that, right? Or if they're really like working toward mastery on those skills, right? But the things that are unconstrained in basketball, okay, when you do a through ball, when you run that offensive play, there's no like set time that you're like, yep, Melissa's mastered that offensive knowledge. Yeah, it's kind of based on the team you're playing. Might even be based on your team. Maybe there's different players on the court than there were yesterday. So there's different things going on. Maybe it's just this strategy. Maybe you're working on a defensive strategy rather than an offensive strategy. These are all unconstrained skills. They change and grow over time. You're never like checking the box. Comprehension is one of them. Vocabulary is one of them too, which is a huge player in comprehension. So it depends on lots of different factors, right? First, a student has to really be able to decode. That's first and foremost in order to get to that end goal of comprehension. But then we know, as I said, vocabulary and knowledge play a huge role in comprehension. So there's not like a single thing or a single strategy that, quote, unlocks comprehension. There's many, many things. And that's what makes it messy and complicated. And that's why it takes a whole lifetime to really develop, not like one unit or one lesson. All of that contributes, but it's truly that over time idea. It's hard to teach because we're forever learning how to comprehend. It really is dependent on the reader, the text, and the task.
I love that. And I love that analogy because it really just paints a picture and brings it to life in a way that's easy to understand. And even thinking educationally, like if you're a teacher in the primary grades and you're teaching phonics instruction, that scope and sequence, it ends. And once you learn the phonics concepts, they're done and you've mastered the phoneme-grapheme relationships. But comprehension, like you said, is so much messier. There's so much more to learn. Just when you think you have a skill or strategy down, then we're thrown a new topic and we go down the rabbit hole, once again, building our knowledge bit by bit. And when we're thinking about how we can actually get students to understand what we're reading, what kinds of things or elements go into that work?
So there's so much that goes into that, right? And the number one thing that I think of when I think of what helps students understand what they read, truly fluency comes to mind first, as in that fluent word recognition, automatic reading, that students are being able to have that, like when we get in the car as adults and drive, we're automatically driving. We're not still thinking about which way to push the blinker up or down to turn left or right. We automatically know. We want students to be so fluent in their word recognition that they're automatically recognizing those words and that they're reading with that appropriate phrasing and they have appropriate expression for the text at hand. The second thing, vocabulary and knowledge. Vocabulary and knowledge are paramount. I'm actually going to read a quote. I pulled it from a research report by Spencer, Quinn, and Wagner. Michelle, we can send you this. We, as podcasters, we don't like to mention things that we don't have the links to, right? So we have the link for this for you. Of students with adequate decoding and vocabulary, fewer than 1% scored poorly on comprehension in this study of, I believe it was 425,000 children from first through third grade. They were studying decoding, vocabulary, and comprehension. So of students with adequate decoding and vocabulary, fewer than 1% scored poorly on comprehension. If that doesn't show the clear connection between vocabulary, knowledge, and comprehension, I don't know what does. That's a very clear indicator that even though we are always learning vocabulary, the more we know, the more vocabulary we know, the more, I know you talk about this a lot, the more ways we know to attack words, right? Our morphology knowledge, our morphology skills, our strategies for word attack. That's so helpful. That is a huge component for understanding what we read. So we have fluent word recognition. We're really thinking about that automatic reading, that fluency piece. We have vocabulary knowledge. And then truly, we need to support students as teachers for making meaning from complex text. If students are not given opportunities to interact with complex text in meaningful and authentic ways with our support as teachers, they're not going to know what to do on their own. I love continuing with the sports analogies. Emma Hayes, U.S. women's team soccer coach. So the U.S. women's team was playing in the friendlies against Japan. There's a whole series of games. So Emma Hayes did something that she, I think, has only done one other time. And I think it's awesome. She took the players who are the very young players. They're newer to the U.S. women's team. So if you will, like the next generation of the U.S. women's team. And she took them and she put them all in the game because Japan is a really great opponent. They're a really high-level opponent. They're a really complex text opponent, if you will. And she gave them all opportunities to be in that game together. Now, she didn't just dump them into the game. I'm certain of it. She did a lot of practice. They practice with the whole team, like the whole team practices together right before the game. And then she supported them through. You could see her coaching. And I'm sure she coached beforehand and got them ready for it. And then she coached throughout. And then she made some changes, right, as the game went on. And I saw her talking about it afterwards, really supported her players through that complex game. So I think of teachers, coaches, our role is to support our students through making meaning from that really complicated text. And then, as I said before, I said vocabulary knowledge, but I think this one is just extending that idea, opportunities to build knowledge across texts and topics. So not just having that, today we're going to learn about this and tomorrow we're going to learn about that. Really a coherent through line. We know that students build knowledge and vocabulary better, as well as access to complex texts better when we have the same coherent through line. So we're learning about topics over many texts, and then we're able to draw meaning about that topic from those multiple texts, and we're giving students lots of opportunities. One of the ways I think about this is as an adult, when I sit down to write something, often we kind of like put our hands on the keyboard and we're like, okay, I either have enough to say about this topic or I don't. And I always think as a teacher, if I'm teaching enough about the topic, my students never have empty keyboard fingers, right? And really, it's probably more like pencil writing hands. But they always have some, like if my students are sitting there like, I don't know what to write about, we probably didn't build enough knowledge. So that probably means they just need to learn more in order to write more or have more experiences with some oral language to really talk it out. That's like a little trick that I like to use. But yeah, helping students understand what they read, all of those things go into it, right? We have the fluency in terms of word recognition and fluent reading, vocabulary knowledge, support for complex texts and opportunities with complex texts, as well as building knowledge across texts and topics. So just to bring it together for you, Michelle.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm so glad that you referenced the complex text component, because I think that's going to be the next wave of big conversations in the science of reading, because we know foundational skills are important. We know decodable texts are important for those learning to read opportunities in the primary grades. And now everyone's like, well, how do we bridge that? How do we bridge that to authentic text? And a lot more people are talking about complex text. A lot more research is coming out about complex text, and how it's not about putting children in the right text level. It's about the teacher scaffold. And like you said, the teacher is who is mitigating the scaffolding. And you're crushing it with the analogies, Lori, because it really helps solidify that idea that it's not about necessarily like, are we throwing the kids in the deep end, but are we supporting them enough to be successful in that deep end? So powerful. Does forming your skill-based groups feel a little mysterious? You have the screening data, but you're still asking, okay, how do I use this to move students forward? A good friend of the podcast, Dr. Stephanie Stoller, runs the Reading Science Academy, and she created an exclusive grouping resource bundle free for Literacy in Color listeners. You'll get Stephanie's cheat sheets for grouping students at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, plus a video that walks you through a real classroom example. And June is the perfect time to dig in before fall screening. I'll always proclaim that I myself am a proud Reading Science Academy member for life, And I can genuinely say that the quality of the resources and professional learning is top notch. The Facebook community is also one of the most supportive spaces I've experienced. Reading Science Academy is honestly one of the first places I go whenever I have a question about literacy instruction or assessment. So go to readingscienceacademy.com/color to get your free grouping resource bundle today. And I want to circle back to how you were talking about fluency in the beginning. A lot of people can have differing maybe definitions of what fluency is exactly. So maybe we could just level the playing field and start out with how would you define fluency and why it perhaps isn't just about reading quickly, reading fast.
Yeah, so fluency is so interesting because it's actually three different things, completely separate, that make up one thing, fluency, right? So it's really hard when you think of anything, it's like, oh, that's just a thing, right? But really it's these three separate things. And the three separate things that I'll tell you about in a second don't even have to happen all at the same time. Like you might just be focusing on one and then the next and then the next, which is a very strange place for teachers to feel and for students to feel is I'm kind of fluent, but not all the way fluent. And that's okay. But the three things are number one, accuracy. So that's where we're saying, especially when they're just beginning readers, the focus should be on accuracy. Are they reading the words correctly? Obviously, that's what we want to make sure they're not reading completely different words than what's on the page, because if we think about comprehension here, then it's not going to make any sense if they're not reading the right words. And we actually want students to be reading about 98% or more of the words correctly. So nearly all of them. And again, if you just think about comprehension here, it's like, yeah, like maybe if you miss one word, I'd still do it as an adult, right? Like there's like a word on a page and like, I don't know that word, but I can still make sense of the rest of it because I know 98% or more of these words. So we really do want that. And as they're beginning readers, they're probably going to be reading some of those words incorrectly. So that's the first focus. Just are they reading the words correctly? After that, I think this is like one of the most important things that happens for students and also probably one of the most misunderstood parts of fluency, and that's automaticity. So the reason I think it's so important is because this is the part where students move from that place where they're taking so much time and effort. My son is in first grade, so he's like right here right now because he, for a lot of words, is still figuring out each word, right? Again, right where he's supposed to be, not a problem, but that's where he is. Like it takes a lot of effort for him to figure out what each word is because he's sounding them out and he's doing a great job with it, but it takes a lot of effort. Where we want them to get to, hopefully in second grade, this is where he'll get to, is reading those words automatically. This happens with, if any of your listeners are familiar with orthographic mapping, we won't get too deep into it, but if they know about that, mapping, that's how most of us are reading, right? We see the words and it's just, we don't have to sound it out every time. It happens automatically in our brain. That's where we want our students to be. The reason I said it's misunderstood is because this often gets misinterpreted because of the assessments we use for fluency into reading really fast, right? Or reading as quickly as you can. I made this mistake when I was a teacher because I learned about this and I was like, oh, my kids can time themselves reading. This will be great. They can make little graphs that show like how they improve. This is awesome. And they were really motivated by it, but completely in a way that they were just reading so fast because they wanted to get the highest time and they had no idea what they were even reading, right? They were just like babbling through. And that's not what we want, right? So we want to find this real balance of like, yes, automatic. So we want it to be a little quicker than where my son is right now, taking a lot of time to read it, but we still want it to be natural, right? So finding that automatic, but not, sometimes if we say rate, that's when people get into like, oh, fast, right? We want it to be fast. But think about it more in that automaticity than with just trying to get as fast as they can. And then the last one, Lori did mention this too, was expression and prosody. And again, they might not be worried about their expression if they're still worried about their accuracy, right? That might not be where they are. That's okay. But once they get to this point of being automatic readers, yeah, let's start to think about, are they understanding the tone of how this character is saying it. So they're reading it with a little bit of expression. Maybe it's a happy, or maybe they're asking a question. So how are they reading it? Are they reading it word by word by word by word? Or are they putting it together into phrases so it actually is making some sense? And you can see with what I just said there, you want it to make sense because that is the link to comprehension. And it is a little bit of a chicken and egg there because they kind of have to make sense of it in order to read it with expression or to read it with the phrasing. So it just kind of goes hand in hand. But you know if they are reading it with expression and with the phrasing and all of that, that they are making some kind of sense of it, or they wouldn't be able to do that. So they are starting to get into comprehension when they get to that point.
And I'm so glad you were talking about how those three things are interconnected, but we do work on them one at a time. And it kind of gives you this stepping stone, like if you're not yet accurate, then we're going to work on being accurate first. And then if you're not yet automatic, let's dial back and see, are you accurate? If not, then we might have to tap into decoding. Otherwise, then we can make informed decisions, brain retrieval. And I think you're so right. So many teachers pull out the timers and the students get this sense of like, oh, I got to beat my time. I got to beat my time without this idea of, no, we want to sound conversational so that we're comprehensible, right? And we know that something like an ORF, that oral reading fluency assessment, is timed. And it is such a strong measure of comprehension. And yet it can also target the decoding problem, the fluency problem, the vocabulary problem, the comprehension issue if you look at the information beyond the score, right? And so when we think about how fluency can influence comprehension, why do you think that is? Why is fluency such a strong predictor of comprehension work?
Yeah. And I mean, I've already made some ties to it, so you can probably figure some of this out. But just to go back to what you said, Michelle, we actually had Jan Hasbrook was on our podcast and she mentioned that ORF data. And she said there's 40 years of research that shows that the ORF is one of the best predictors of comprehension. Again, there's that tie to fluency that is so strong and has been proven with research for years and years and years.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know. And I wish I knew that earlier in my teaching career, for sure.
Because everyone is like, oh, how are we going to assess comprehension without running records, right? Like without asking them to retell me the story, right?
Yeah.
How can you
check
tell
their
just
fluency
with a little
first.
passage?
But yeah, one of the biggest things that we like to talk about, and Lori kind of touched on this too with when she was talking about driving, right? And when you do it automatically, we all, as people have limited cognitive energy or brain space, whatever word you want to call it, to do any one activity, right? So no matter what you're doing, we all do it, right? We're watching a movie and then we get distracted by our phone and now we don't know what's happening in the movie anymore. And you have to go back, what's going on? Because we only have so much brain space. And if once you put it towards something else, it's hard to put it back towards that other thing. And that goes for reading too. So if you think back to those students, like you mentioned, the ones that are still working on decoding and accuracy, that takes so much of their brain power. They have to put so much thought and effort into, okay, which sound is each one of these letters making, because it can be different in each word, right? So they're just trying to put that together and trying to make it into a word they know. That is so much work. And it's really great work and it's awesome work. But if they're doing all that, imagine how hard it is to try and think, okay, well, so now what does that word mean? Because it could be the word bat and it could mean 3 different things. And so I don't know exactly which bat we're talking about here. So I need to make sense of the word in this sentence. Okay, what does this sentence mean? That's a lot of thinking to do when you're still just trying to put b, a, t together into bat. And you're doing that with each separate word. So if you're putting all of that energy that you have towards decoding, that's really where the students are putting all the energy and they don't have a lot left to make the meaning. But once they flip into that other part of automaticity, once they get a lot more of those words becoming automatic, that just is freeing up the space in their brains. We actually have a picture of this in our book where the brain space is so much less now for decoding that you have all this open space that it's like, oh, now this is all available space that the kids can actually just now think through all those things we just said. What is this all about? Now I can even as I'm still like reading and the words are coming, I'm also thinking about which bat this is. And oh, in this context, I can tell it's this kind of, it's about a baseball bat. Got it. So you can do that kind of thinking because you've freed up the space by reading automatically.
Yeah, it's like that magical moment
It
where
is
things
like
finally
magic.
click.
Seems magical, right? It seems magical.
I know.
But a lot of work went into that.
A lot of work, that's right.
A lot of explicit instruction was in the making of this.
And for different students, it happens. Some students, even before they get to school, it happens. And for some, it takes a lot longer and many more times for them to see those words over and over for them to become automatic. So it's not going to happen all at one time for every student in first grade. But when it does, and it starts becoming more and more automatic for them, that is when you truly see that shift open up.
Yeah. And I think it's also helpful to note when we do look at the fluency norms, how they don't even start until middle of first grade. Like, we're not worried about this automaticity piece in kindergarten with our beginning readers. There is a developmental progression of getting students to that point.
Absolutely.
That's such a good point. Such a good point, Michelle.
So I know in true Melissa and Lori form, you're all about the practical. So maybe we can talk about some simple ways teachers can build fluency in the classroom.
Yeah. Okay. So I am so excited to share these. I feel like nothing is going to be groundbreaking, right? That we share. But these are, I think if we think of them as core practices, and then us as teachers, like you said, Michelle, when you were doing the introduction, teaching is an art and a science. These are the core practices that we can do every day with our students. And then it's how we as the teacher take them and mix them around to make sure that they are as effective as possible for the students in front of us. So first of all, daily short practice. Fluency is fun and simple, right? We get big gains, big wins with a short amount of time each day. And it truly is one of those like consistency over time. So daily short practice with grade level text. And I'll say that again, grade level text. And we want to use routines. We have different routines I'll talk about. We have model reading, echo reading, choral reading, and partner reading. I'll also go back to that grade level text. I won't leave us dangling there. But model reading is really when me as the teacher or the expert reader, I'm reading the text that I've chosen for students to read for this fluency practice. I'm reading it to them. They have the text in front of them. They're tracking along. If they don't have the text in front of them, the text is up on our whiteboard. Everyone has access to the text, and that's the most important thing. We're not just hearing the words, we're seeing them too. And they're hearing an expert reader read with appropriate phrasing, with accuracy, with expression, all of those incredible fluency components coming together in this reading, in this model reading. The next component is echo reading. So that's where I, as the teacher, would be reading a phrase or a sentence, again, depending on my students. And then my students would echo read, not echo memorize, echo read back to me the portion of text that I just read. So they're a little echo. And that's helping students in very scaffolded ways build a small portion of fluency within that larger text. Then we have choral reading. Some teachers like this, some teachers don't. It's fine if you don't like choral reading. I actually remember one year when I taught fifth grade, I was like, we cannot choral read. Like I had 36 students in my class and I was like, this is insane. I have the boys who are screaming. I have the girls who you can't even hear. Now I have another kid who I'm like, is he even saying anything? I have no idea. But it has worked in other years. I remember a third grade class, loved to choral read. I heard them all. I was like listening, walking around here. Okay. So anyway, that's my disclaimer for choral reading. If you don't like choral reading or it doesn't work for you and your students, don't do it. Basically, we all read like a course. It's not a deal breaker as long as you get the other ones in. Choral reading, we're all reading like a chorus. We're helping students hear. So I should still be heard as the expert reader. I'm the lead voice in the chorus. My students are reading with me. And it's an opportunity in a very low stakes way for everyone to practice reading this text. I might, however, implement some of the same strategies that I did for echo reading. Maybe we only choral read a small passage of text. There are no rules. So you don't have to choral read the whole text together. If it's long, if it's laborious, if there's just a portion that you want to choral read for a certain purpose, maybe it's a speech and you want to read a couple lines of this speech so that we're really practicing building fluency with those specific lines because maybe they're really important or maybe they have a vocabulary word that you're teaching. That's fine. The next component of fluency is partner reading. And this is important because students get that practice with a partner who will gladly track along and let them know if they've done something correct or incorrect, especially in the younger grades. And again, the important piece is students have access to text. We are taking turns reading, and we're I think providing some sort of routines for our students here, if possible. Partner reading routines where we're each tracking along, where we're saying, oh, try that word again. Oh, go back and read that again. Can you read that with more expression, right? We're giving students those sentence frames to be able to kind of coach each other very lightly, I would say, light coaching, right? Teacher's still the coach, but your students can help each other as well. So I said that we should be doing this with grade level text, right? And it's different. We want short text, so 50 to 200 words-ish. We want a short text that students can read over and over again, because the idea of building fluency is daily short practice, repeated reading of the same text over time. So we would read the same text, I love a week, clean Monday through Friday, right? Repeated reading over the course of a week. It builds. And by say it builds, it means it builds in independence for the student. So the teacher is, I love to think of it like this. I think of this as a parenting thought too. How can I work my way out of a job? What am I doing for my students? What am I doing for my kid that they can do for themselves, right? And I think of fluency that way too. Scaffolding over the course of a week. If we're repeated reading the same text over time to build our fluency, and that daily short practice is meant to help get to Friday. What happens on Friday? Friday's independence, full independence, which means we have to get independent practice over the course of the week, right? I can't expect to get to Friday having never have my students independently read that text and then have them read it independently on Friday. So it might look like this over the course of a week. We might, as the teacher, I would say like an always here, always start with the expert reader model reading the text at the beginning of the week. Then we're going to slowly scaffold. Maybe some students need that expert reading again. Okay, do it. Maybe some don't. So we can transition into some echo reading and choral reading over the course of the week, as well as some integrated partner reading for practice. In that partner reading, you're going to have some independent reading, right? Because that's the point. One partner's reading, one partner's tracking. They're also getting that text again auditorily, right? And also they're looking at it and tracking. They're not just not reading, they're also listening to the reading. That's super beneficial. And then they're practicing reading it independently, finally by themselves on Friday. That might look like reading it into something where we're recording them on a device. That might look like students standing up in front of the class. That might look like maybe students even partnering, standing up in front of the class and reading. Maybe they go to another class. Maybe they just go to another teacher. This is, again, where that art and science comes in. This is so much fun. And it depends on your students. We all know some students would be absolutely mortified to stand up in front of the class and read a poem, even if they've read it 100 times during the week. Then don't have that student do that on a regular basis if that's something that you think would be a traumatic experience for them. Help them be successful. Send them to their favorite teacher to read during that teacher's maybe bathroom break with their students. Maybe they're just whisper reading it in the hallway to that teacher. We could be as creative as we want here. But it is so fun to think about fluency because this is, I think, a big daily win that's like really short bursts that get big wins. Michelle, Melissa, and I created a really fun, this is like a super silly thing. We had a little back and forth on social media with Tim Rosinski, Fluency Guru, and he said something like, okay, we'll write some peanut butter poems then, because we were like going back and forth about poems. So we wrote some peanut butter poems, and it ended up turning into this like huge thing. We were like, well, we can't just stop at writing poems. We're going to write some readers' theater scripts. We're going to do this whole thing. So anyway, we'll give you a link that you can put in your show notes so your listeners can download a resource pack for this if you want to try to build some fluency. Now, I will say it's grade level text for some grades, right? Yeah. Like this is like more like a fun fluency activity. But if you want an additional like really fun resource to maybe try out this routine before you get into it with some grade level text, we can share that with you.
I love it. I love it. And what's a peanut butter poem?
Oh, just a poem about peanut butter. And
topic.
Yeah, we were talking about peanut.
I thought it was like another strategy.
He shared something and I was like, these are so cute. I said, I love peanut butter. I was like, where's all the poems about peanut butter and honey, peanut butter and fluff, peanut butter and banana? And he was like, write them. We were like, okay.
Amazing.
So, just really silly. I didn't say this earlier, but it's a great place to practice these routines in a fun and silly way with our students. And we always say grade level text and content. And yes, those things are so important. And also, let's have some fun too as we're learning new routines, right? So this is a great little entry point to do that. Just a little tidbit to share.
Absolutely. I love that. And all of these routines are very simple, and they're those tried and true things that a lot of teachers probably have experimented with at one place or another. It's more about being intentional about having a routine in place that we're going to replicate from day to day and week to week to have those kinds of wins.
You're so right, Michelle. So right. So accurate on that.
I love it. And I really appreciate your emphasis on the grade level text too, because we're not going to get better at something that we can already do well. So I think that's the key takeaway there as well. We need a little bit of a stretch. We need a little bit of desirable difficulties, as the science of learning people say, right?
I love that.
So now let's switch gears and tap into vocabulary. So how does vocabulary now influence comprehension?
Vocabulary and comprehension obviously are really tied together. I think this one is a bit more obvious than the fluency and comprehension tie because legitimately, if you don't know what the words mean as you're reading, it's going to be really hard to make sense of what you're reading. So the more words that students know, obviously the easier it will be for students to understand that text because you can teach them some strategies like context clues, right? That was a big one. I know when we were teaching strategies in isolation, it was just teach them context clues and then they'll know every word because they'll just be able to use the context clue. But that doesn't work in the real world. It doesn't work with real texts. It only works with texts that are built to practice context clues, right? Because in real texts, there's not always a context clue. In fact, there's often not a context clue. And it's really hard for students, especially when you tell them to use context clues, because they're like, I thought I was supposed to use some context clues, but there's nothing here. So it really is much more helpful for them to know the meaning of words. And this can start from the time before they even get to school, they're learning the meanings of words and they're just building that vocabulary. Like Lori mentioned, that unconstrained part of it. You're building your vocabulary from the time you start talking until forever. I know I brought up the last time we did a presentation, Lori didn't even know about this, but when I started my sourdough journey, have you been on one, Michelle?
No, but no. I'm so intrigued.
I feel like so many people
I feel like I don't have time for it, but I really want to do it one day.
But even if not sourdough, you get into some hobby, right? And then all of a sudden there's all these new words. So when I got into sourdough, I did it with a friend at the same time. And we started our own little sourdough glossary together because we didn't even know what we were talking about. Oh my gosh. And then we put the bowl in the banneton after the bulk rise. What is that? We don't even know what these words mean, right? And so again, we couldn't even comprehend the recipes we were trying to read because we didn't know what the words meant. That happens all the time. And I do it with my son too, because he gets into things, right? He's into Minecraft and I'm like, I don't know what any of this is. I don't know what you're talking about. Right? So you need to have the language in order to be able to make sense of it. So just knowing as many words as they can is so helpful to be able to comprehend text.
Yeah. It's so true. I think anyone can resonate with that, even as an adult. And so when we think about the importance of teaching the words, all of the words of the world, right?
So many words.
So many words. What can effective vocabulary instruction even look like?
So Lori's going to give you the more practical part of how to do this, but I'm going to just talk about 4 key elements that we like to talk about. So no matter what strategy you're using, think about these 4 key elements. They are based in research, based in how to teach vocabulary. Every time I go through this list, I'm like, this is just the opposite of how I was taught vocabulary because I was just given lists to memorize words. And then I took the test at the end of the week and then never remembered those words again. And they were never in my vocabulary. I just did it to take a test. That's not what we want at all. So these are the things you want to think about. One is the meaning of the words, of course, right? Even when I was doing those worksheets and memorizing those definitions, I was worried about the meaning. But when we say meaning, we really want the students to understand the meaning. So not to memorize a bunch of words that they don't know what it actually means, but to really get it. So that can look several different ways. I can tell you one, it is most likely not telling them exactly what the dictionary says, because often that is more confusing for students than it is helpful. So sometimes it's taking that definition and putting it into words that are friendlier for kids. You hear that a lot, right? Make it a kid-friendly definition. Yes, that's helpful. But even then, sometimes we use an example of the definition of a windmill. Trying to define what a windmill is, it has these paddles and it moves from the wind and it makes no sense to kids. But if you just show them a picture of it, a lot of times they've seen it before, or now the definition can make sense because you're like, oh, I see what's happening here. I see what's moving in the wind. Without that picture, it's just like, what? I don't even know what you're talking about. So those kinds of things, sometimes it's acting it out. It depends on the word, what they need to help them understand it, but just helping students really get the meaning for real, not just memorize a bunch of words.
Yeah, and sometimes you're pairing those strategies together to make more sense of it.
Yeah. So that was just the first one. The second one is about connection. So you really want to talk about how different words are related to each other. Our brains just kind of work in a way that things stick to each other. So if you're just doing 10 random words that have nothing to do with each other, it's going to be really hard to remember any of them. But if they all connect to a certain topic, if it's windmill, but you're also talking about breezes and gales and gusts and all things that connect together, it's going to be much easier for them to stick in our kids' brains. And then the last two we like to do together, which is usage and repetition. Usage just meaning like, no, don't do that test on Friday and never have them use that word again. Have them use it over and over and over again. Make sure they're even just saying it, right? So just saying it with you, repeating it after you, getting it in their mouths, right? And making it part of something they know how to say it is important. But also then, can they use it in their writing? Can they use it during a discussion? Can you challenge them to include it in those places so that it does, again, become part of their real vocabulary? And then the repetition goes along with the usage because, again, you don't want to just talk about it once and then it never appears again, but keep it going and even try to keep it going after maybe a whole unit is over. Just thinking about how to keep that in the regular conversations you have with students. It doesn't even have to be an actual conversation in the classroom. It could just be as they come in the morning and you say hi, but you're like, well, how can I bring in some of these words that we've talked about before? So just the usage and repetition to keep that vocabulary going.
Yeah, those are all really great things to keep in mind, and especially the usage because you teach kids or you talk at kids, but just because you taught it doesn't mean they got it, right? Like that old adage. And
Absolutely.
sometimes we don't even give kids the opportunity to say the word out loud. They just hear us say it.
Yeah.
So being intentional with all of those experiences so they can internalize it, I think is so important. So maybe now you can model what this can actually look like with a particular word.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through a quick routine. It's from our book, The Literacy 50. Michelle will give you the link for the show notes so that anyone can use this 5-step vocabulary routine. It's just a 5-step explicit vocabulary routine. No surprise here. It was inspired by Anita Archer. Anything with explicit in the name. All right. So I'm going to say the word and we're going to do the word feature today. So I'd like to take us through the word feature. Melissa and Michelle, the word today that we are learning is feature. Repeat after me. Feature.
Feature.
Great. A feature is an interesting or important part of something. I noticed in the word feature that the vowel team EA says the E sound. Did anyone else notice that?
Ooh, I did.
Okay. And I also noticed that feature, I see an E at the end, but I don't hear an E sound. So that's a silent E at the end. Did anyone also notice that T here is making a ch sound? Let's say that word again together. Ready? Feature.
Feature.
Great. A feature is an interesting or important part of something. An interesting or important part of something. I'm going to show you a picture of an elephant, and I'd like you to tell me the interesting features you see on an elephant.
Oh, it has a long trunk.
A long trunk. That's an excellent feature to notice.
Big ears.
Elephants do have very big ears. That is a big feature, an interesting or important part of an elephant. Okay, so let's use the word feature in a sentence. I'm going to read it out loud to you. Many animals, birds, and people are carnivorous, which means they eat meat. You might be surprised to learn that some plants, like the Venus flytrap and the pitcher plant, are also carnivorous. These unusual plants have fascinating features to attract, trap, and kill their prey. Okay, so we heard it in a sentence. Also, then I would go on to connect the animals. We're connecting the animal that we just talked about to the sentence. Maybe my sentence is about that too, right? So we're talking about features. Okay, so then I would add that word feature to our vocabulary word wall and perhaps my students' vocabulary books. And we would be focused on using that throughout our unit of study. So perhaps this is a science unit. We're learning about carnivorous animals or whatever it would be. And we're adding it so that we can use it, right? So then it becomes this use tool rather than just a word.
Beautiful. I love a good routine.
I
And
love a routine.
it's replicable from word to word to word on whatever you're doing, which is easier for students to grasp too, because they know what's to come. And it takes the cognitive load off the teacher as well.
100%. It's one of my favorite routines from the book. We get a ton of feedback on that particular routine, and teachers love it. It's just so fast. I mean, you heard how many times, and you said that word multiple times within 90 seconds, right? So you're hearing it, you're seeing it. I mean, we're not because it's a podcast, but you're seeing it, we're using it. And then students, you 10 exposures at least in those 90 seconds and context. So we're really focusing on connecting the sound, the spelling to the meaning.
Yeah. And then we already talked about there are so many words out in the world. There are so many words to know when we're reading. So how do we decide what to teach explicitly and what hopefully we'll just pick up along the way?
Yeah, I will try to make this short and sweet. First of all, you can't teach every word. We all know that, right? So I think thinking about choosing words that are important to understanding the text or the concepts that students are learning about. Choose the high impact words that are going to unlock deeper meaning or ideas. Teach the words that are going to be helpful for students as they speak and write about the topic that you're teaching. So truly, let the text and the reason for the reading or the reason for the writing, let that guide you. I think it was Lynn Stone or Sean Morrissey, someone on our podcast who talked about vocabulary, said, let the word lead the way.
I love that.
I love that. I'm pretty sure it was one of those two. So we'll give straight credit to both of them. But for example, if you're reading a book and there's a word that is really important to understanding a character's disposition, and maybe that impacts meaning later in the text, you definitely want to teach that word. That's an explicit teach word. But maybe there's other words that you're just like, oh, we come across this word in the text and I can just say what it means and we're moving on. We know time is not anyone's friend in the classroom. That's the thing we need more of always. So be discerning about the words that you teach and let the text and the reason for why you're reading that text and then what students will be doing during and after reading that text. Let that really lead the way.
That's such great advice. And I think it's really helpful to take that note too, because oftentimes teachers are unsure which words to tackle. Like, can you just give me a list of the words they're supposed to learn in fourth grade, right? And really, it depends on what you're reading, what you're discussing in class, what your students already know. Sometimes programs come with vocabulary words that half your students know the meanings of, and it wouldn't be worth your instructional time. So it really is dependent on what's going on in the four walls of your classroom.
Yeah, that is such a good point, Michelle. And I think that's where we honor the listener. We honor you, the teacher. Here, this is your experts, your students, and what they need. They're in front of you. And vocabulary is a great place to really honor that.
100%. So for the teacher listening who knows, oh my gosh, fluency and vocabulary truly are these important things to impact comprehension, what kind of small shifts can they make in their instruction even tomorrow to make a bigger impact in their classroom?
So we would say, really try to prioritize that fluency practice daily. I know there's so many things that you're trying to prioritize in a day. We know that. But as Lori said, 10 to 15 minutes, really try to get that in there. So impactful and can make such a difference. And I will make this plug for, I know it often stops at elementary, but middle school and even high school, if you still have readers. Yes, if you still have some struggling readers, it's so helpful and such a short chunk of time. So try to get it in there as best you can.
Yeah. And I would say even if you don't have struggling in high school, only because the texts in high school get really hard.
Yeah.
And everyone benefits from hearing Shakespeare read out loud.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then I would say for vocabulary, teach fewer words really deeply. You can't take all that time to teach every word, like Lori said, but have conversations about words constantly. Building that curiosity about words and having fun and just nonchalantly throwing out some new words to them and telling them what words mean, just having conversations all the time. I try to do this a lot with my son, is just in a natural way, not forcing it, but just really making it part of the way of your class. Is like, we talk about words all the time, but we spend time teaching just a handful of them, because otherwise it's going to be overwhelming and you won't have the time for it. And then a few other things, just remember to build that knowledge across texts. So bringing the knowledge together, making it stick for students, and really focusing when you're reading with students on the meaning of the text, not just a strategy like trying to practice context clues with this text, but we're trying to get meaning out of this text.
Those are so great. And I think they're really practical insights for teachers to take into the classroom tomorrow. And even just a mindset shift or a philosophy change of like, this work is important and I'm going to make the time to implement that in my classroom too. So I appreciate you both so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's clear that you're both experts on fluency and vocabulary, and I adore your book. We'll also link that one in the show notes, and I appreciate all of the links and goodies that you have to share. I hope listeners will be sure to snag all of those, especially the routines. Before we end our little recording here, maybe you can just let listeners know where to connect with you further.
Yeah. So literacypodcast.com is a great place. It has all of our podcasts. It has blogs, any routines that we've created to go along with our podcast, which is awesome. And then also Melissa and I are working on a place to make stuff from our book. So all of the content that we present about, like the content that we just talked to you about, Michelle, how we can make that available because people are asking for it. So we want to make sure that we can make that available. That's sorinpractice.com. Michelle, we sent you that link, and when people click on the link for the peanut butter poems, they can get on our email list and then hear what's coming, but you can grab that freebie by just signing up for the email list.
Perfect. I love it. And I just recently started following Science of Reading and Practice on Instagram too.
Oh,
so
there's not really much there, to be perfectly honest, but there will be at some point.
Yeah.
First steps forward, right?
Always growing. I love it. Just another great way to connect with people all over. Again, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. This was fun. Thank you for all that you do.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully. Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started.